Nevada Humanities has been supporting this event since the very first year, and they've hung in there with us and have been one of our most stalwart supporters. We really appreciate that. So with that, I'm going to introduce Mr. Ron Terrell, who's the president of the Nevada Cattlemen's Association, who's going to introduce Dr. Grandin.
Thank you, Charlie, and what a pleasure it is to have the honor to make this introduction on behalf of the 30th National Cowboy Poetry Gathering, as well as the livestock industry of Nevada. In 2010, Dr. Grandin was named the Time Magazine's top 100 most influential people of the world. That's quite an honor. More importantly, though, to be addressing the livestock industry in the crowd, her work on animal behavior and animal welfare has had a global impact on the way livestock producers view animal behavior, handling livestock, and working facility design. Dr. Grandin, through her life story movie, work with autism and numerous public appearances to the public, has earned credibility and believability with the consuming public of our product, beef. Because of that, the livestock industry leans very heavily on Dr. Grandin as a spokesman on animal welfare issues. And it's very important that we have someone like this to speak for the industry that is so credible with the public. Dr. Grandin finds satisfaction in seeing positive change in the real world and is passionate about making the world a better place to live through her actions, something we should all strive for. Please help me welcome Dr. Temple Grandin.
It's really great to be here today, and I got to get a drink of water first. So they got the kind of water that just goes all over the place. Great to be here. And what I want to do is I want to talk a lot about some basic animal behavior principles. So I know a lot of people who are here with horses, so I wasn't going to just do, I'm going to take, you know what, I got to get rid of this stand here. I think I'll just hold the mic instead. Talk a lot about principles that apply to every kind of animal. And as far as photography goes, I'm fine with doing pictures afterwards. One of the reasons why I don't want pictures during my talk is that the flashes, I just find that very distracting. I have a little problem with attention shifting slowness, and it distracts me. But afterwards, you can do all the pictures you want. That'll be just fine, doesn't bother me then. One of the things in ag dealing with the public, I'm going to start, just want to talk about this before I get into my presentation. We need to be showing what we do. You know, when you get bashed, you need to open doors. What's chores to you out on a ranch is interesting to the public. You know, that's something that might be, hard to understand. And I have a video up on YouTube called Beef Plant Video Tour with Temple Grandin, and it shows how a meat plant works. Because if we don't show things, then the activists show it to you, and they show all this bad stuff. Yeah, there's bad stuff that's gone on. But to say that everybody acts bad, that would be like saying everybody's a drunken driver. That's just simply not true. And the internet today magnifies the voices of radicals. Both sides of an issue. It magnifies the voice of radicals. And so, ranchers just, showing how they take care of their animals, we need to be showing that. People in the cities find that really, really super interesting. Okay, I think I'll get into my presentation now. And let's talk about some very basic things when you're handling an animal. A calm animal is easier to handle. I don't care if it's a dog, a cat, a horse. If that animal gets all upset, oh, now you turned out all the lights, I can't see my notes now. And I'd already asked you not to do that. Okay, I can see them now. You can go down one notch from that. If an animal gets all upset and scared, it takes 20 minutes to calm back down. So if the horse has thrown a great big fit, just put it away for half an hour, let it calm down. When the cattle have gotten all crazy and are milling together and jamming together, maybe let them calm down. take a little break. I guess in the old days it was a smoking break. That's probably politically incorrect today. But take a little break and let them calm down. Now, when an animal gets excited, what is this excitement? It's fear. And that's a proper scientific word. It's supposed to be science-based. Fear is actually the proper word, not excitement. Now, how do we know that cattle and horses are calm? When they've got a nice, soft brown eye. When you see the whites of the eyes show, that animal is getting scared. That is a scientifically validated measurement for fear. Okay, horses and cattle, tail is swishing. I've seen horses where the tail's going faster and faster and faster and faster, then he blows up. It gives you that early warning, but a lot of people don't heed that warning. It might be a really good idea to end that training on a good note before he explodes. This is one of the reasons why you want to keep, when you're teaching new things, keep it short. Heads up, ears pinned back. Watch what your animal is doing with its ears. What is it looking at? I want to get you to be a whole lot more observant. I'm an extreme visual thinker. I'm going to be showing you how some of my first work, I looked at little distractions that scare animals. What you need to do is get away from language. You want to understand an animal, get away from language. Now, I really wanted to go to the Tom Dorrance session yesterday, and I couldn't go because I had my other talk at the college. And I watched some of Ray Hunt's demonstrations in the 70s and the 80s. And he did magical things with horses. And a lot of these really good trainers, they'll talk in an abstraction, get in tune with the horse. I don't know how to teach people how to get in tune with the horse. What you need to do is teach people to see these visual signs. You see, what I think was happening with someone like Ray Hunt is he was seeing these visual signs unconsciously and got a feeling. You know, and several times I've gotten good horse trainers to shut their eyes and tell me, what do you see? Something I can explain to the student that the horse is starting to get upset. Yes, we've got the, what are you seeing? Let's get back to sensory. Okay, bison's got his tail up. Yeah, that's fear. Yeah, better not mess with him then. Okay, look at how animals can watch for danger. The horse and the zebra have an ear on each other. Now in this situation, there's no fear here, but animals will just watch things with their ears. What's your animal looking at? And the other ear is pointed at me because I'm taking the picture. In fact, I've got another slide I don't have in this slide set of a mule, and he's got one ear pointed at a lady and the other ear pointed right at a man. I call that ear radar. Now, does an animal actually have emotions? Some people say to me, well, that's being anthropomorphic. Now, all throughout my career, I've been a silo buster. What is a silo buster? That is a person that jumps from thing to thing. I'll go to an autism conference, then I'll go to a gifted conference, then I'll come to this conference, then I was out at the Googleplex, that was really cool. Lots of undiagnosed people with autism out at the Googleplex. And those guys have good jobs. They tend to avoid the labels. They all go to Montessori schools, and they're doing just fine at the Googleplex. And then you get special educators that don't ever, go to those things. They don't know what these kids can do. This is what worries me. Now, the thing about animal emotions, there's tons of research on this, but it's all in the neuroscience literature. It's now just starting in the year 2000s to get into animal science and veterinary literature. But animal emotions existing have been known for years, since the 60s. Well, let's just look at some simple facts. Prozac works on dogs, and it works on other animals too. If the animal's brain was from another planet, it wouldn't work. Neurotransmitters are the same. Now, Jack Panskep outlined the basic core emotions. Now, if you go over in the neuroscience literature on Google Scholar, you'll find literally hundreds of papers on this. Okay, we're supposed to be science-based today? I still have journal article reviewers telling me to write agitation or excitement instead of fear. And that's scientifically wrong. And when you're training a horse and he's acting bad, that is fear. Okay, fear is what makes an animal avoid getting eaten. Horses as a species tend to be more fearful than cattle, though there's a lot of overlap. Dogs as a species, since they're a predator, tend to be lower fear. Then you have anger. What does anger do? Well, when the predator's eating you, you can then throw the predator off. Then you have separation distress. When you like wean the foals and the mare and the foal are going crazy, that's not fear, that's separation distress. That's a different brain system. Then you have seeking. This is what makes an animal want to look at things. And the thing that's really weird, if I were to decorate a pasture with flags, that high-strung Arab will come up and look at him first. But if I went and shoved a flag in the Arab's face when it was tied up, that animal would get into complete fear mode way more than, maybe a quarter horse that's got a calmer temperament. I'm not a fan of rough training methods for horses. But there's people that do that and they get away with it. But they only get away with it with the calmer animals, the animals that are genetically lower fear. They pull back, they habituate. You do the Arab, well, he just ends up getting post-traumatic stress syndrome. And you just ruin the horse. You just completely wreck the horse. And then, of course, we got sex. Well, we call it lust here because I don't want to have my webpage censored by Net Nanny. And then we've got the mother-young nurturing behavior, and then we got play. Now, let's just look at some of the science that shows that these emotional systems actually do exist. If you stimulate the fear center in the brain, you're going to get behavioral signs of fear. If you, if you stimulate these areas, the stress hormones go up. Look at how old this research is. This research is as good now as it was back, years ago when they did it in the 60s. Okay, if you take out the fear center, I'm not recommending you do this, but they actually removed the fear center from some animals and they got really tame. Rats were no longer afraid of cats. Well, you wouldn't live very long in the wild if you were a rat and you weren't afraid of a cat. Now, a basic principle in working with an animal, cattle or horses, is when you force an animal to do something, you get a lot more fear stress than when the animal voluntarily does it. This is why it's a really good idea to walk your heifers through the handling facility. Get them used to that. You want to make sure an animal's first experience with a new person, new equipment, or new anything is a good first experience. You want to introduce the four-wheeler? Well, don't go chasing them around with it. Let the animal come and explore it. Let's turn on the seeking trait. Let's turn the seeking trait on. Well, up there at the top, you got beef cattle with a lot of rough handling. And then down there at the bottom, we've got trained antelope, where the animal is completely trained to tolerate blood sampling. And you've got no fear in that situation. And there are trained antelopes. And people thought it would be impossible to train antelopes because they're so flighty. When an animal is really, really flighty, you've got to introduce new things more slowly and carefully so you don't cause a big, massive fear reaction. Now, I talked about sensory thinking. Okay, you can have pictures, you can have auditory, you can have touch. Now think about it. A saddle feels different at each gait, walk, trot, and canter. This is why some horses buck when you change gaits, because that was introduced too quickly, and then you might as well have just put a bucking strap on them. Now one of the ways you might be able to fix this problem is change the saddle pad in the saddle to make a new feeling picture, because animal thinking is very specific. Maybe switch the horse to English riding, and he may be absolutely just fine if you did that. It's very specific. Now, this is a very nice study that was done in 2011 that showed if you habituate a horse, for example, to a blue and white umbrella, that doesn't transfer to other novel objects. Think about it. You see how these items look completely different. Get away from words. Tarps look totally different than umbrellas. And when I was on the movie site, they didn't habituate the trained show heifer that they use for the PR pictures to reflector boards. They just assumed that since she was trained to white trucks, it'd be fine. But think about it. Trucks tell you they're coming. They don't make erratic, sudden movements. It's not the same. It's very specific because it's sensory-based. Now, this is a picture of a young autistic man sent to me to show how he thinks in pictures. And when I was young, I thought everybody thought in pictures. I didn't know that my thinking was different. I thought everybody was a total picture thinker. Well, I've now learned that when you get kids with these different labels like dyslexia, ADHD, and whatnot, you've got the visual thinkers like me that cannot do algebra. You know what? Jump to geometry. I'm getting really worried about all this algebra craziness. People have got to remember that the Greeks invented geometry first. You know, that's sort of a little inconvenient fact right there. Then you get the kids that are the mathematician kids. Well, if you got a fourth grader who's brilliant in math, let them have the high school math book. These kids are going to have trouble with reading. And then yesterday we had a discussion at the college. There was a 12-year-old that wanted to attend an aircraft class that was just in a classroom, nothing dangerous. Well, the administration was doing some real bureaucratic stuff and said he couldn't be there. But you know what? These kids that are quirky and different, we got to hook them in middle school that may be doing aircraft maintenance is cool. That's when we need to hook them, before they get addicted to video games, and then they collect Social Security on disability. And that makes me absolutely crazy. Well, things like the whole Folklife festival and doing these kinds of things would be a great thing to get some of these kids that are quirky and different. Then you get the word thinkers. They know everything about history or their favorite subject. Middle school is when we need to be getting some of these kids involved with things that are career-related. And I talk about that in my Autistic Brain book, which I do have for sale over there. In the Autistic Brain book, I talk about the different kinds of minds. I discuss that in my TED Talk. The science behind the different kinds of minds is in that book. Okay, animals' first experience with something new. Let's make it good. First trip to the veterinarian, maybe just feed a treat there. Make it good. Now, this horse was terrified of black cowboy hats. White cowboy hat, no effect. Now, when I put the hat down on the ground, it was less scary. But then as I moved the hat closer to my head, I could feel this horse tense up. Yeah, like he was getting ready to rear. And I said, get that hat away from him. All right, let's look at some other specific fear memories. Mustangs. You have a lot of Mustangs around here. Yeah, you can ride them just fine, but they're not good about shoeing and veterinary work. But think about it. Out on the range, it was people on the ground that did something bad. Nobody ever did anything bad on the back. See, that's a separate file folder. Think about different kinds of bits. You can have a horse that's had its mouth ripped up with a wire snaffle, then every jointed snaffle is now a bad bit. You know, switch to a one-piece bit, but not that dreadful thing you've got over there in the Folklore Museum. Yes, it's beautifully made, but it needs to stay in the display case because it's going to rip a horse's mouth right off. You know, that is not the way we ought to be, doing things. But why don't you go in your tack room and put all the snaffle bits in one pile and all the one-piece bits, where it's a solid one-piece bit in another pile, then shut your eyes and have somebody else at random put different bits in each hand. Hold a bit here, hold a bit here. And and the horse tends to make the category of jointed versus one piece. And sometimes a horse that's got a problem, you can fix it by just removing the thing they're afraid of. Another horse was afraid of naked white saddle pads. If it had a saddle on top, it was fine. But think about it. You see, it's a different picture. It's very, very specific. Well, animals tend to associate bad things with something they either saw or heard right at the moment that the bad thing happened. It's associative. Okay, so I'm talking about emotions in animals being similar to people. Yeah, what makes people different than animals? Size of the cortex. We got a computer sitting up here, way more computer than what they've got. Like a dog might associate where he got hit by a car with bad. A person would never do that. This is where you've got higher order association cortex. Well, other categories animals can make is guys with beards are bad. A real common thing with dogs. Guys are bad, girls are good. That's very common with dogs. Or maybe ladies with long braids or something are bad. They tend to tune in on some big visual feature on a person. There was another animal that was terrified of diesel-powered equipment. If it ran with a diesel, it was bad. If it ran with a gas engine, it was fine. This was an elephant that I think somebody attacked with construction equipment. And he associated that with the diesel. Dogs make categories. When I'm on the leash, I protect my owner. When I'm off the leash, I can go play. That's another example of making categories. Man on the horse, man on the ground. Cattle need to be trained to go in and out of pens, both to the man on the horse and the man on the ground. I've seen cattle show up at a meat plant where they'd never seen a man on the ground before, and they're freaking out with a gigantic flight zone. Everyone's wondering why they're running back and forth and they're so wild. Where back on the ranch they were tame. But a man on a horse is a different picture compared to a man on the ground. So they need to get trained to both of those things. Rapid movement, it makes the predator chase, and it tends to make horses and cattle spook unless they are specifically trained to a particular rapid movement. Now down on the movie set, they had this camera that just moved like this. And you could just bring that down around the heads of cattle, and it was like it was not there. Boy, that was kind of trippy. Now, some of the very first work that I did with livestock, I noticed that animals notice little distractions we tend to not notice, especially when those distractions are in new places that they've never been in before. You wouldn't want to be galloping down this road, because when it gets to the white cover there, you're going to get dumped. You know, it might be a good idea to see that in the road and slow down. I want to get you more aware of things. You know, sometimes somebody will say, well, the horse just spooked and there was no reason. Well, usually there is a reason. You just didn't see it. You know, in my cattle work, I've been complaining for years about, well, don't have chains hanging down in your chute. Now, a dairy cow who goes into a milking parlor every day really used to be able to walk by the chain. But the new animal, first time they come in, is not going to walk by it. So why, after all these years, do I still have to talk about stuff like chains hanging down in chutes? Because people are not removing them. I now, in my humane handling book, and I've got some of those over there too at the bookstore, I've got checklists now, verbal checklists, because I have learned now that I think differently. I didn't know that in my 20s and early 30s when I first started. You know how I learned that my thinking was different? I asked a speech therapist, think about a church steeple. How does it come into your mind? And she goes, just pointy thing. Well, I don't see that. I start naming off specific ones. People that tend to be more visual will start naming off where they're located. So why did I ask a church steeple and not house or car? Because most people will see their own home or their own car. You know, I want to ask you something you don't own that you don't really care about. Okay, non-slip flooring. Animals panic when they start to slip. Doesn't matter what it is. Okay, now we talked about observation. How many people in here notice that the animal's vision is locked onto the sunbeam? Oh, we're not doing very well here. We're not doing very well at all in the observation department. I want to get you more observant for these things. You know, they could be a little paper cup off in the grass they might spook at, that the wind just moved it, some little thing that you just don't notice, some silly little thing. Vehicles parked along the cattle handling facility, and then the cattle don't want to go in the handling facility because the pickups are parked right by it. You know, get down in those chutes and see what they're seeing. Okay, I know we've got people in here interested in autism. Okay, if you're working with a nonverbal client, you've got to be observant. Let's say his behavior's been good, now his behavior's terrible. He's probably got a hidden painful medical problem we can't tell you about. And acid reflux is big number one. Or this kid is now freaking out every time he goes into church. Well, you know, mics are dangerous things because they can screech and make terrible noises. So now every time the kid sees a mic, he's freaking out because he's afraid it's going to screech. Or he sees a fire alarm box, he's afraid it's going to go off. You know, sensory oversensitivity. This is a really big problem. Sometimes you can help reduce that sensory oversensitivity by letting the kid take the mic and inch it up to the speaker where he is controlling that. Then sometimes you can get them not to have this problem. Okay, at the veterinary clinic, let's have a non-slip floor. Okay, does anybody notice anything about that puppy? I have Cheryl, my assistant, go on the internet and said, find me cute pictures of dogs at the veterinarian. Well, every single picture that's out there, you see that brace position on that dog? All right, how many people saw that? It's got a good. We're doing a little bit better now on observation. We're now doing a whole lot better. Okay, and it's in a full brace position. Now, she didn't go out on the internet looking for a full brace position. I said, just find me cute pictures. And then I noticed when I show it, when I'm really looking at it, I've got 2 slides like this in full brace position. And we didn't even look for that. Okay, what are some behavioral principles of restraining an animal? Sudden, jerky motion scares. I don't care what the animal is. Okay, if you're holding a puppy or something, there's an optimal pressure. Not too tight, not too loose. Also, I just met a guy that works for silencer squeeze chutes, or at least he had a silencer squeeze chute jacket on, that used to work at Hughes and Gans when I first started out. He was about the same age as I am. And back in those old days, these are squeeze cattle way too hard to squeeze chutes. That's gotten a whole lot better today. You know, you don't have to squash them. Non-slip flooring, you must not trigger the fear of falling. And then solid sides works, you know, especially right there on the back half of that squeeze chute. Try covering up the back half. So as you're standing there, they don't see you standing there. My student Ruth went out and did a survey on cattle handling. We just got published in Beef Magazine in 2014. And 27 out of 28 feed yards are doing a really good job of handling cattle that we could put out on YouTube and we could be proud of it. Yeah, one stupid kid in his 20s, music player stuck in his ears, decided he was too lazy to cut ear tags and just ripped them out and tore up the cattle's ears. Now we got 27 feed yards out of 28 doing a great job, one stupid kid doing that stupid thing, and that's what's going to end up on some video somewhere. We've got to look at everything we do and go, how's this going to play on YouTube? Okay, you got different kinds of stress. You get short-term stress. Okay, they round up some Mustangs. Yeah, that's a short-term handling stress. But then you got some of these stallions that keep locked up in stalls all the time, and then you wonder why the stallion's a fruitcake. It rapes the mares, it fights all the geldings. That's because it never learned any social skills. You know what you need to do with yearling studs? Throw them out, let a bunch of geldings bite them a bit, and let them learn the give and take of social skills. Because animals reared alone, I don't care if it's dogs, stallions, or cattle, when they're reared alone, they fight other animals in a really nasty way because they never learned the give and take of social rules. And you don't have to have a stallion that's a fruitcake. You can have a stallion that can be a normal horse that you can ride. It's not going to go berserk. See, that's an example of bad becoming normal. Then you get more long-term stresses. This is not really an issue so much with our cattle out here or with horses. It's much more of an issue with pigs that are raised in confinement. You know, those are some very, very hot issues right now in animal welfare. And I'm getting a lot of calls right now about rounding up Mustangs. Well, if you're going to do it with a helicopter, make sure you get a big enough catch corral. I think a lot of the problems, you need a catch corral probably at least the size of this gym, maybe bigger, to run them into. And then you have another little small corral, you load them. Don't try to run them into the corral, you got to load them in. You got to have more space to run them into. Okay, now we get into things, these are long-term stresses, where you have an animal like a laying hen, and she wants to hide when she lays her eggs. That's a instinctual behavior, because a fox otherwise would eat her up if she didn't hide. So there's actually research that shows that, we ought to give a hen a little private place to lay her egg. Otherwise, she probably feels like she's in a really bad part of town, a really, really, really bad hotel room with no lock on the door, or maybe no door at all. That would be really, really stressful. Now, gerbils, you get, do stereotypies. You know why they're doing it? Because they're worried about the non-existent aerial predators in the kid's bedroom. Yeah, you need to give them something they can hide in, like a toilet paper tube or something like that. Then they won't do it. See, this is why you got to figure out what's motivating an animal. Yeah, you give it some, you give it some plastic pipe to go into, and then it doesn't do the digging anymore. It doesn't want the sand to dig in, it wants the place to hide. Yeah, there's certain hardwired behaviors that the animals have. And you can round up cattle on the range by doing that zigzag motion. That triggers a bunching behavior. Okay, now how do we, again, know that these emotional circuits actually exist? Well, if you stick an electrode down in the thalamus, the cat's going to have a rage. I learned about this when I was in college. But you know what? They used to call it fake rage or sham rage. Look at how old these papers are. All hidden away in the neuroscience literature. Now, these are very invasive experiments. You were putting wires down into the head of the cat and then had like a USB port in the top of its head. Looked really terrible. And actually healed right up and the cat doesn't even realize that it has it. Yeah, we don't have to repeat these experiments, but they show very, very clearly that animals have emotional systems. And it used to be called fake rage. Well, and the scientist who did this experiment now is old and retired. And he wrote in the Neuroscience Journal about 3 years ago that the reason why he called it sham rage is he didn't want to get torn apart by his colleagues. That's the reason why he did that. But I was taught when I went to school that this wasn't real rage. Yeah, of course it was real rage. You stimulated the rage center. You know, there's a lot of good evidence, and even old evidence, that showed that these emotions were real. Well, this never made my general psychology book. You know, this stimulation produced realistic behaviors. The cat would attack a stuffed rat, but it wouldn't attack a coffee cup or a styrofoam block. Yeah, look at the date on that paper, 1965. That one they left out of the psych books. It was really interesting going through the old literature. It's now free, available online. I want to thank the American Physiology Society for that. And a real interesting way to get into scientific papers is to use Google Scholar. Just go on Google, type in Scholar, and you click on the link for Google Scholar. Now, personality traits or behavior traits in animals have a strong genetic basis. Some horses are higher fear than others. Some people are higher fear than others. Some are lower fears. Think about different personality traits like the music mixing board. You have a music mixing board over there, and you got all those little switches there, and you can change the volume. Dial up the fear, dial it down, dial it down. Dial up the separation distress trait, dial it down. Dial up the seeking trait. Let's look at that in dogs. You got them skinny, frisky Labrador retrievers that want to chase every ball. Then you got the heavy set lab that's a perfect dog for somebody in a wheelchair because he's content to lay around all day. Low seeker. You see, that's a genetic difference. And there was some very good early work that was done in quail that showed that you could just select for these different traits. Well, in birds, you know, you hear about the old thing, hypnotize a chicken. Well, it's not relaxed. It's actually frozen in fear. Because there's two ways that an animal can react to something scary. You freeze and hope the predator don't get you. That's when the predator's far away. All right, let's say imagine that something came out of Area 51 and it's really, really far away, and you just stay still, hope it doesn't see you, and it's putting a big beam around. Then it gets close to you, you run. That's the active fear response. See, that's now been figured out in brain research now. There's two ways that you can manifest fear. And how did you measure the separation distress? Well, this little chick here would like run against the moving sidewalk going in the wrong direction to stay with its buddies. So they could actually measure strength of motivation to stay with those buddies. You know, dogs, they need a lot of companionship. We got a lot of dogs today, tons of behavior problems because they're just locked up in the house all the day. And then you go on the real fancy stables and you've got a fruitcake of a stallion you can't ride because you locked it up in a stall and never learned any social skills. Well, seeking, the drive to explore new things. You take the fear center out of the monkey, then all he does is explore. Normally, if you were to let a monkey loose in this gym, I'll tell you where it's going to go. It's going to go right up the bleachers, and he's going to be up on these beams. That's the normal response. Get up high. Well, if you take out the fear center, then he's going to explore the briefcases on the floor there. That is not the normal response. Now, I put a piece of paper on a clipboard down in front of some cattle. You see, this is seeking. Come up and look. The wind flips the paper, the cattle jump back. And I used to call this curiously afraid. I go, wait a minute, this is like a switch. They're switching back between fear and seek. That switch has actually been found in the brain now. You know, it's another thing we could have done with that black hat. I had a trainer suggest this, is get a long piece of string and have it down on the ground and then move it slightly and get the horse to follow it. In other words, turn on the seeking behavior. Because when seek's turned on, the fear's turned off. There's like a biochemical switch in the brain. Well, pigs, they want stuff to root. It's one of the things that pigs want. Yep, and if you just put them in a barren environment, you wonder why they bite the bars, got nothing to root. You know, animals often prefer new things if they can voluntarily approach it. Just remember this principle. You introduce something new, especially to a very genetically flighty animal, what you'd call hot in a horse. Let your animal voluntarily approach. Okay, I don't know how many times people said to me, my steer was fine at home, my horse was fine at home, he went berserk at the show. Let's think of 3 big things, scary things you got at that show: flags, bikes, and balloons. Why don't you decorate the pasture with flags and balloons and let the horse approach? Guess what? The arrow will be up there first, be the first horse to freak out over it. Bikes, just put it out there, let the horses approach it, then move it slowly and get them used to bikes. And bikes are scary because they don't tell you they're coming. Paradox of novelty. It's both scary and attractive. That's probably why people like to go to horror movies. You know, it's, okay, the circuit in the brain switches it back and forth between seek and fear has actually now been located. You know, must be science-based, really nice neuroscience experiments. Well, if you stress an animal when it's very, very young, especially a genetically flighty animal, you permanently upregulate the nervous system. So they took these poor animals and they exposed them to this rock band blasting out the animal room, and they ended up having the biochemical switch more biased towards fear. You know, there's a lot of abused dogs that have got a lot of problems. Now, there's 2 kinds of positive emotions. There's seeking, but then did you like it? You ate a great big fudge sundae. Well, did you like it afterwards, or did you feel sick? And in rodents, scientists have actually now dissected out liking from seeking. Yeah, liking is the opioid system. Okay, that's a system that gets addicted to OxyContin and things like that. I can tell you, I wouldn't touch OxyContin. And wanting's the dopamine system. What makes some people want to jump out of airplanes in a Batman suit? Well, that's high seeking in people. That's not me. I'd be scared to death. And then you can take drugs that either block or enhance these mechanisms and tease out that this really does exist. Okay, why are scientists studying this? Well, they want to study why some people have pathological gamblers. Okay, they see a casino and boing, you put them in the brain scanner, show them a picture of a casino, the dopamine areas are lighting up, you know, like it hit the jackpot. Yeah, and then after they've gambled away the paycheck, they didn't really like it very much. Okay, you got some animals are high seekers, like the polar bear. What do? They just walk for miles and miles and miles. That's why they get walking stereotypies. We got to give that animal something to do. Dogs, they need companionship. A lot of dogs don't handle being home alone all day. Now out on the ranch, dogs get a chance to get out and be dogs. So you don't have behavior problems. When I was a child, all the dogs ran loose and we had no behavior problems because they all got socialized. But on the other hand, we had nobody deliberately breeding aggressive dogs. Nobody was doing that back in the 50s. And there are some dogs where you're breeding for extreme territoriality, breeding for extreme prey drive, and you've just got a gun with a hair trigger with no safety. That's really a bad thing. Horses, we've got to carefully habituate them to new things. Okay, let's say you're training the horse just to tolerate the saddle. You start to see a little tail switching. All right, let's end within about 30 seconds before it bucks. In other words, you can see that coming. It's sort of like a pot coming to a boil. Let's not have it blow up and be bucking. Okay, the old neuroscience literature is really, really super interesting, and it's online now. Okay, let's look at some other posture signals. When a dog just has a relaxed mouth, like in the Animals in Translation book, that's totally relaxed. That dog with the mouth closed like that, that's not scared, but it's just, you know, it's sort of like more aware. It's a little bit concerned about something. Oh, maybe there's something from Area 51 off in the distance, you know, or maybe there's a mountain lion off in the distance and the cat are a little bit concerned about it, but it's pretty far away. You know, it's just watching. Okay, what I want to do right now is I want to just open it up for questions, and we do have a roving mic. And you can also ask questions about autism if you want. I'll be happy to answer those too. So that's why I kept this animal talk fairly short, because I know we've got questions about autism that people want to answer. Okay, I'm going to pick somebody if nobody has a question. Okay, let's get somebody with the mics right here. Okay, I'm going to pick somebody where they can, come on, people. Okay, who am I going to pick? Right here? Okay, right there. Okay, Well, chicken slaughter is very, very similar to turkey slaughter. Basically, turkeys are just bigger, but it's the same principles. And the other problems we're getting into with some of these animals is we got turkeys and chickens that grow very fast, and you can get problems like heart attacks and problems caused by rapid growth. And that's something I call biological system overload. Now, it's not going to happen to our cattle living out in the range. That happens to animals we bring inside, like the dairy cow. She's getting pushed so much to give so much milk that she now has difficulty breeding. Well, they've now found the genetic trait that actually, kills off the embryos. Well, let's say you correct that genetic trait. Well, you're not going to have enough feed to feed her. You see, one of the reasons why killing off the embryos is nature has a mechanism that when an animal gets too skinny, you turn off repro. You don't let repro get turned on. Well, you override that mechanism. We're going to have to feed it some real high-octane feed. There's a point where you need to back off just a little bit on the milk production. We need to start looking in a lot of things. What's optimal, not what is maximum. That's true for lots of different sorts of things. Lots and lots of things. Okay, we're going to pick somebody else. Okay, right here, right over there. Get the mic over there so everybody can hear. There's a lot of echoes, and I actually have and then we'll get the lady with the orange shirt next. Okay. Okay, the question concerned color vision. Birds see full color, and some of them can see ultraviolet. Horses, cattle, dogs, all the regular kinds of animals we work with, do not see red. They are what's called a dichromat. You see, a trichromat, a human being and a bird, has got 3 color receptors in the retina. Kind of a bluish purple, yellowish green, and a red receptor. Okay, horses and dogs and cattle just have 2 receptors, the yellowish green and the blue receptor, and red's going to appear as gray. Now, the trade-off here is by having dichromatic vision, this gives them better night vision, and it also gives them better vision for visual contrast. That would be looking for little visual details, little things that move that might be scaring them. And these experiments were done by dissecting out the retina, so they're very, very definitive. You see, it used to be, and in some of my old stuff, I wrote that animals were black and white visual, but that's wrong. The papers where they actually took the retina apart hadn't been done. Okay, there's a lady right here with an orange shirt. She'll be next. So there's a wild donkey out in the field that wants to come in with your animals. Okay, now when you say the wild donkey, it's a wild donkey you adopted, or? Okay, so it's a donkey you adopted. It's not a wild donkey coming off the range. Okay. They're afraid to go across the creek. Well, the problem is that a lot of animals that are raised in more in a captive situation, they just haven't been exposed to that many different things. And the creek just may appear really scary and something that is just incapable of crossing. Now, this brings up an important thing. When we're trying to troubleshoot behavior, I don't care if it's animals or it's a kid with autism. When you think in language, you tend to overgeneralize. A lot of people say to me, what's the most important thing for autism? Or my dog's crazy. Well, I don't know what you mean by saying a dog's crazy. Did it bite somebody? Or is it just happy jumping on you? That could both be crazy. Okay, we're dealing with an autistic kid. If he's 3 years old, I'm going to tell you 20 or 30 hours a week of one-on-one teaching. But once he gets older than that, there's no way that I can just answer the question, what's the best thing to do for autism? I have to have a lot more detail. Ask a lot more questions to find out exactly what is actually happening with the kid or with the animal. Now, I had a lady say, my horse goes berserk. Well, she asked me this at a conference. I had to ask her 5 other questions just here at the podium before I found out that the only place the horse went berserk was in cross ties. Probably had an accident in cross ties. I said, you know what, you don't have to use cross ties. You know, let's just do the easy fix on that one. That's something I can just remove from the horse's life. Other things, like black hats, I can't remove from the horse's life. And it's going to be, I can work on making the horse better about black hats, but he's probably never going to be totally safe. You know, because it's like a post-traumatic stress syndrome, it pops back. And if you've got an animal with a very, very high-strung temperament, you're going to have a much harder time getting rid of that fear memory. But the thing is, I've got to have a lot of detail. You know, okay, you say, what's the thing to do for autism? Well, is this kid verbal or nonverbal? Is this kid a 6th grader? Is in high school? Okay, it might be a high school kid addicted to video games. Yes, I'd like to get him over to the community college and learn a trade. You know, and actually that's something we need to be doing in middle school. We got to hook kids on things that can be careers in middle school. I'm a big believer of that. Or is it, you know, what's this animal doing? When you think in words, you tend to overgeneralize. And I find this when I'm writing animal welfare guidelines. I mean, I'll write silly things like handle cattle properly. I don't know what that means. We need to get things that are more clear, like traffic rules. You don't see a sign out on the highway that says drive at a safe speed. Or maybe a stop sign is a suggestion that you ought to stop. It's clear. It's very, very clear. Okay, let's do another, okay, question right here, red tie right back there. Now gradually work the mic across the room. Okay. How can riding a horse help an autistic child? For certain kids, the combination of rhythm and balancing seems to be really good and can sometimes help stimulate speech. Now, in working with animals, with kids with autism, either therapy dogs or horses, I have found there's kind of 3 kinds of kid. The first kind of kid's instant best buds, and it works just great. Another kind of kid's a little bit afraid of it at first and then gets to like it. Then you've got kids where the animal is not appropriate because they have a sensory problem. They're scared to death that dog's going to bark and that's going to hurt their ears. Or they can't stand the smell of the dog. Then in that situation, the dog is not appropriate. Now another hint with service dogs. They need to be taught vest on is work, vest off is play. Now when the vest is on, don't ask your dog to do non-work activities like roll over and have its belly scratched or something like that. You know, you want to keep that category. Vest on is work, vest off is play. Okay, right here, there's the necklace right there. She's afraid of noise. Yep, that's a common problem with dogs. And there's some people that find thunder shirts, you know, these pressure garments, help. Now that's going to have the most effect if it's only on for in the first half an hour that you put it on. The other thing you can do is reward confident behavior. If the dog's cringing under the bed, okay, I'm going to let it cringe under the bed. If it comes out a little bit, wags its tail, reward that. Reward the seeking behavior. See if you can get it to do some seeking activities, you know, while this stuff's going on. Another thing that can sometimes work is a sound effects recording, and you need to get a high quality recording, not an MP3 file, but a real high quality recording. Or if you have an old record player, that's a full spectrum recording, and play it at a very, very, very small volume and gradually increase it. But this is a common problem with dogs. And I just heard an interesting story about a police dog. He was trained to tolerate guns going off, but he was terrified of thunder and fireworks. You see, this gets back to that specificity of the animal thinking. Okay, let's take one more guy up here with a red tie, and then I'm going to start working across the room. No, I didn't say not to do the zigzag motion. I didn't say that. I said what the zigzag motion does is it gets the cattle to bunch. You actually want the cattle to do that. And what you do, and I've got stuff in my humane handling book on that, no, you want to get cattle gathered up, you have to do the zigzag motion. But what you want to do is you want to trigger the soft bunching behavior. You don't want to get milling where they're going like round and round like this, the soft bunching behavior. Okay, so you're just barely on the edge of the flight zone where it doesn't make a move, and you zigzag and they'll start to come together. And then you can zigzag forward and make them go. And then when they start to go, back off. The mistake that people make when they zigzag is to just keep pressing down on them and they take off then. You know, when they do what you want, back off that flight zone. See, that's the principle of pressure and release. You want to teach a horse to lead. If he steps forward, let go of the lead rope. You want to train that animal that if he even leans forward, then I let up on the lead rope. But let up on it within 1 second. Yeah, no, I didn't. I make it very clear. I did not say not do the zigzag thing. Okay, let's get somebody coming. Right, how about right here? I'm going to kind of work the mic over to the other side.
What are signs of autism in babies or toddlers?
What are the first signs of autism in babies and toddlers? Well, the little baby that doesn't play peekaboo. You know, most babies have what's called joint attention. You go, oh, see the birdie over there, and a kid will look. The autistic kids tend to not have that. Sometimes I was the kind of baby, I was too good. I had speech delay until I was 4. And I went in a very good early intervention program starting at age 2.5. We did a lot of applied behavior analysis stuff. My speech teacher invented ABA. She just didn't know it though. She was way ahead of her time. And she'd hold up a cup and she'd say cup. She'd go cup, and then she'd go cup, where she'd slow down and enunciate the words so I could hear it better. Because if she talked fast, it went into gibberish. And then we did lots and lots of turn-taking games. You gotta teach these kids how to take turns. Don't let them just zone out on an iPad. If you do something with an iPad and a kid under 5, it's gotta be with a teacher taking turns. I'm not a big fan of screens under age 5, lest they are being used in a turn-taking activity with a teacher or the parent. Then you can use the iPad because it's high interest. But the little kid that's too good, the little kid that doesn't want to be touched, you pick the baby up and it gets stiff. Well, you don't just set that baby aside, work with it. That's a baby that needs a bit more interaction, play more peekaboo with it. I'll tell you, this stuff's not rocket science. Oftentimes, grandmothers are good with these kids. Now, I've just talked to some parents yesterday that said that their school would only give them an hour of therapy a week. That's enough therapy for that therapist to be your coach. And then go to your church or whatever, get some grandmothers to volunteer, and grannies are often the best, to do a lot more work. But then you use that therapist at school as your guide. I'm a big believer in professional guidance. And then she can give the grandmothers and the students that are going to volunteer a lot more lessons. These little kids need consistency. I'd like to have somebody that, for a couple of years can be consistent working with these kids. But the research is very clear. The worst thing you can do with a young kid that's not talking, doing a lot of repetitive behavior, doing a lot of weird behavior, is to do nothing. Every expert will agree on that. They will fight over which method you use. Now the research, ABA's got the most research, but other things like pivotal response, Denver START model also now are evidence-based. And you know what? The important thing is you got to work a lot of one-to-ones, just working with this kid and engaging them. And be careful about sensory overload. If this kid screams every time you go to Walmart, that's a kid that's got a lot of sensory issues. Okay, maybe here there's somebody. We'll kind of work across the room here.
Thank you, Doctor. You spoke of an Arabian, perhaps warm-blooded horses with a bit of a higher seeking and then maybe panic.
Well, this is the thing that's kind of weird. It's kind of counterintuitive that an animal like an Arab horse, for example, it would be considered a hot-blooded horse. It's a high seeker, but it's also a high fear. That seems kind of counterintuitive, but that tends to be the way it goes. You know, see, as long as it can voluntarily approach, it will be the first one to walk up to a flag that's tied to a fence. But if you, let's say the Arab horse is in a stall and you just threw flags in there, it's going to be kicking and freaking out a lot more than some other horse. It's genetics. It's just breeding. Breeding. Okay, we pick animals that have different traits. You see, and you kind of look at, look, if you look at the music mixing board, okay, we've got one of those switches is seek, dial it up and down. Another one is fear, dial it up and down. Another one is separation distress, dial it up and down. Another one is sex, dial it up and down. You can genetically select animals. You can also genetically select the separate traits. That's what was done with the quail. If you're really interested in this, I have a textbook called Genetics and the Behavior of Domestic Animals. It's kind of pricey. You can pick it up on Amazon. It's just breeding. And you can breed for, you know, some people call it personality traits. Some people object to the bit that can be kind of anthropomorphism. But there are genetic differences in fear levels in human beings and in animals. And normally, the high fear, the high seek tends to go together, but you could actually select horses where that wouldn't be the case. You know, these are traits just like you can breed for coat color. The other thing that's really weird is traits are linked. One of the first experiments done on this years ago, done by Belyaev, he wanted a tame fur fox that wouldn't tear your hands off. So he selected fur foxes that licked your hand rather than bite it. And after about 20 generations of foxes, they ended up with a black and white border collie fox dog. See, when they selected for that gentle temperament, low fear, non-aggressive temperament, it changed the whole body shape of the animal. You got a heavier boned animal, stockier body, and then you got the characteristic black and white border collie pattern. See, traits can be linked in weird ways that are not fully understood. No, it's just breeding. And you see, and breeding interacts with what we do. Okay, there's still, I mean, people now, I don't think very many people here are doing rough training methods. Okay, tie a horse up to a stake, throw tarps and all kinds of junk at it, pulls back, fear, pull back, pull back. The lower fear horse will habituate. Oh, yeah, it was scary at first, it's not that bad. You do that to the Arab, it will be like a veteran with PTSD, post-traumatic stress. It will not get over it. You will just destroy the horse if you do that. You know, I'll have fear memories that are just really, really super bad. That's where genetics interacts with what we do to animals. I'm not a fan of rough training methods, but I find that people that tend to favor that kind of stuff, well, they just think Arabs are crazy. No, Arabs are not crazy. You just can't abuse them. You can't force them. You know, if you use gentler methods, they're very intelligent horses. You know, it's a difference in genetics. Okay, right here. And I also want to emphasize there's a lot of variation within a breed. There's a lot of variation. You know, okay, you might, let's say this is the range of fear. Okay, horses on the mixing board, you can dial them up and down here. Cattle on the mixing board, dial them up and down here. And dogs down here somewhere. But then Arabs, it would be, yeah, here, work horses maybe here. You see, it's a continuum. Okay, let's go on to the next question. A cat to a vacuum cleaner? Now, has the cat already been terrified of it? It's what? Well, you know, first of all, just leave it out in the room so the cat can just explore it. You know, in other words, he sees what it is. Then maybe you turn it on. I mean, I wouldn't turn it on with the cat right next to it. You know, let's gradually introduce this, and you know, maybe you turn on the cats in the next room, and don't corner the cat with it. You see, when you tie a horse up to stake and you throw beer cans and tarps all over it, that's the same as if you cornered the cat in the corner with the vacuum cleaner, and it can't get away. And that's where and that's differences in cats too. You see, some animals get a lot less scared of this stuff than other animals. And right now we have horrible problems with sound sensitivity in dogs. And I think some of this is caused by living in too sheltered an environment. When we were kids, all the dogs ran around outside. You know what, thunderstorm phobias, we just did not have that as a child. We never even heard of that problem. And we had a lot of labs and a lot of golden retrievers and just mixed breed, what we used to call mutts back in those days. Okay, let's go right here.